This is Good Enough for God, a podcast about God and how he partners with imperfect people. I'm Dana, and I'm so glad you're here with me in my basement. This is an episode for the dudes today, and I think for the dudettes too, who have a dude in their life. And I know I've said dude a lot, but like a son, a nephew, a brother. So I think it covers about all of us. My guest today is a man. You're a dude, right?
I am a dude.
David Savage. Welcome, David.
Thank you.
Yeah, so you are the author of a book called The Savage Path, a memoir of modern masculinity. And you also host a podcast called Wrestling with the Inner Man. So is it safe to say that you specialize in being a man?
Yes, I'm
Okay.
trying to help others be better men, and as I continue to work on myself.
Okay. So David, before we get into all this man talk, I think we need to talk a little bit about tetherball.
Okay.
Because, when we talked on the phone, you brought up tetherball. What's up? You're a fellow tetherball player?
Yes. Well, I had listened to your podcast because I'm very studious. I like to do my homework and my research. It kind of comes from my career in sales, of discovery and relating and propriety. And so I heard you talking with one of your female guests that apparently you've been friends with for a long time, but that you were very competitive and that you used to go play tetherball until your wrist bled. And of course, that's an old game. I don't see many tetherball poles around anymore.
Right.
And but that was the thing, when the bell rang at recess, you ran out there to try to get to the tetherball pole, and then you try to keep winning until somebody knocks you off, and then you get in line again. But I was left-handed, so people weren't expecting it come around the other way, and so I had a little advantage, But I loved punching things, because I'm a savage.
I guess I liked punching things too. I didn't even think about that. It really is a good way to get your aggression out. Yeah, it was huge, 4th, 5th, and 6th grade. And I had a tetherball I got for Christmas from Santa Claus. And my dad put it up in the snow for me Christmas Day. And I wore all the grass out around the tetherball pole. It was just dirt. I sent some neighbors home crying. It wasn't pretty. And they were boys.
Yeah, well, I'm sure if you got your own, match in your backyard, that's kind of the home court advantage ultimately.
Yeah, I guess I have an inner man in there somewhere. I don't know.
It's competitive spirit. I like that about you because I'm like that too. I hate to lose. I think it's because I'm the youngest of 4 children and I, was just striving for a little attention or something. I'm not sure.
Yeah, that makes sense. I don't know what my excuse was, but well, David, let's get back and let's talk about your book and your podcast. How did you end up writing this book? Tell me about your journey to being a man.
Well, I was extremely blessed as a young man. I was deeply involved with the Boy Scouts of America. It's no longer called that today, but I had a crew cut wearing filterless Camel cigarette smoking scoutmaster who was a chief master sergeant of the NCO Academy. And believe me, there were no easy merit badges. And, wilderness survival, we were like going through the Air Force program of escape and evasion school. So, I just had these adult men that really cared about the young boys and young men in the church and the development of your skills as a leader. And so I got my Eagle Scout Award on my 15th birthday, and then I got my gold, bronze, and silver palms. And then I was interested in girls, so I decided that I would found a high adventure explorer post that was co-ed. And so then we started doing a lot of backpacking, and I became president of the Explorer Presidents Association. I worked and taught all the waterfront merit badges at summer camp staff. So I taught rowing, canoeing, life-saving, swimming. And then, I went on to the National Jamboree, and I was a ranger at Philmont. So that's a real esteemed position because there's like 20,000 people that apply for 500 jobs, and you got to have really good scouting credentials to get that job. And then you're a guide, and this is in New Mexico. And so, and then I've been backpacking my whole life as a result of that. And I just love being out in God's creation and just fishing and doing all that stuff. When the Boy Scouts were litigated over and over, all the way to the Supreme Court, to the point where they had to allow homosexuals in the organization as scoutmasters. And then, of course, what naturally followed were a lot of sexual assault cases. And then they were being sued, thousands of lawsuits. I don't know if you remember, but they were putting
Yeah.
ads on TV and, everywhere, infomercials. And so they were being forced to sell off these valuable properties that had been donated by people for summer camps and things to try to pay off the lawsuits. And finally, they just had to roll over. And now they're not even what they were. And so I don't
Right.
support that
Mhm.
organization anymore. I support Trail Life, which has replaced it and has a more Christian backing behind it. And they want the fathers to engage more. So as all that was happening and the whole swing of the pendulum radically to the left, I have to say, and the
Mhm.
whole woke and DEI and everything, I retired from my energy career and I just said, well, where's the response, man? It's just like everybody just folded. And,
Gosh.
someone needs to respond to this. And, other people that I talk, as a high level executive, like, well, we have to represent the company and the policies and, we're management. And I said, well, I'm not. I'm retired now. So I will be the lightning rod and I'm going to
Okay.
write a book. And so that's what I did. I wrote a book, which is largely a tip of the hat to many of my scouting experiences, but it's also very humorous. A lot of funny stories in there. So it's not like a finger wagging thing. It's just a memoir of how
Sure.
I benefited and how I went through difficult times of my life and lessons that I learned. And there's lots of good nuggets in it, I believe. And it was a interesting process just writing and self-publishing a book.
Yeah, so what do you think, like, it was really kind of the collapse of Boy Scouts and what it was and kind
Mhm.
of what it did for young men in their lives. How has that trickled down through society? What do you think the impact has been?
Well, clearly, I mean, Satan is behind that. I mean,
Mhm. Yeah.
because they're not trying to replace it with anything better or reform it. It's a teardown of
Mhm.
what, in my view, unmistakably the best youth organization to bring young boys into manhood. And the Scout Oath says, "I'll help other people at all times. I'll keep myself physically strong, mentally awake, and morally straight." Who wouldn't want that? And
Right.
yet they tore it down,
Yeah.
and so and then you have all this confusion and attack of anything masculine, everything's toxic.
Yeah.
The feminism just, it had its merits. It needed to do things for women on equal
Mhm.
pay for equal work and many
Mhm.
other worthwhile goals, but then it became militant, in terms of just
Yeah.
going after anything masculine and trying to purport this argument that we're all totally equal physically, everything. It's just that's not the case. It's not
Right.
biblical.
Mhm.
Uh, you know, God has a lot to say about that in the Bible, and
Mhm.
so what we have today is a manhood fog. There's a lot of young men today that are confused. It's like, what does it mean to be a man? There is no
Right.
rite of passage or anything in the United States. Is it when I had a beer? Is it when I first had sex? Is it when, whatever? And it's guesswork, and that's
Okay.
not good. And
Mhm.
so I think that what we need is books like the one I've written and organizations like this new one that I actually have a podcast on Sunday called the Ion Path, where it's fathers guiding daughters and sons, from
Okay.
childhood to adulthood through fatherhood. And it's a 3-year program, and they have like these challenge coins and they have these rites of passage ceremonies. And so, what a biblical definition of man or manhood is. In my house,
Okay.
it's you reject passivity, you accept responsibility, you lead courageously, and then you live your life for the greater reward, God's reward. And so, and I got that from Robert Lewis, who had a terrific book called Raising a Modern Day Knight.
Okay.
And I took my sons to this Christ and the Tetons father son adventure, and we had a big ceremony at the end.
So, to be a man, it doesn't involve, like, sitting in your basement playing video games all the time?
No, so my tagline is the 3 Ps, porn,
Okay.
pot, and PlayStations, have hollowed out this generation of younger men. And, you've told me, Dana, that you have daughters that are
Yes.
dating age now.
Yep.
And I have a daughter who's 36 now, but
Okay.
she was really struggling. It's like, man, where are the decent guys? She graduated from Baylor University and
Mhm.
got a job as a marketing manager for Schlotzsky's, the sandwich shop,
Oh,
and
yes.
was
Yeah.
in Austin, Texas, and everybody was like, "Golly, you got the perfect job in the perfect town." And so she is meeting these young men in Austin. And Austin is the most liberal city in Texas, and I like going there and all, but there's a bunch of musicians and keep Austin weird vibe, but they basically young men who don't want to pay for dinner or open doors or anything, and my daughter was like, Dad, I got to get out of Austin. I need to move back to Houston where there's some energy people like you, that
Mhm.
are real men, that will make decisions and lead. And so
Yeah.
that's what she did actually.
Interesting. My daughter, my youngest, she waits tables at a country club here where we live, and and then also sometimes ends up behind the bar. She's not old enough for that really, but we
Hmm.
won't turn her in. Um,
She's just washing glasses, folks, just
yeah,
for the
yeah.
audience. Yeah.
But they'll have to, like, restock the bar or carry heavy bags of ice and stuff like that, and she said she sees men who work there just standing there watching her and another girl carrying these heavy things. They don't even offer to help. And she's like, "I can't even believe that." I'm like, "Yeah." The other day I was at Lowe's picking up mulch, ordered a bunch of mulch, went out and they load it in your car and there was nobody there to load it. So I waited and then I'm like, "Well, I guess I'll just do it myself." And I was getting ready to, and a guy pulled up behind me, another customer, and I said, Nobody's here. I'm just gonna, I think, get it myself." He's like, "Yeah, I'm not waiting. He said, "Here, can I help you?" And I was like, "Yeah." I go, "Well, do you want me to help you too?" Hoping he was gonna say no. He's like, "No." And I'm like, "Gosh, you're such a gentleman." That's what I said to him. It's just so nice.
It is. It's a shame that it's so rare these days, but we haven't taught them, and our society, there's no stigma associated with just watching women do that, and I mean, there's men that want to be kept men.
Yeah.
That's the problem that your daughters face, is that there's a lot of young men out there who are Peter Pans in Neverland that are never going to grow up, and they're looking
Yeah.
for another mommy,
Oh
and
my gosh.
that
Yeah.
movie Failure to Launch with Matthew McConaughey, it was kind of humorous, but it was really kind of tragic that that's a statement in our society.
Yeah. Yeah. So, okay, maybe you answered this already, but what does it look like exactly to be a biblical man?
Well, I did answer that in terms of, the manhood definition that Robert Lewis came up with. And so Robert Lewis, he was an All-American tight end at the University of Arkansas, but his father was an alcoholic. And he had these embarrassing situations that happened to him growing up. Like he went out for football in 8th grade and he didn't know what a jock strap was, or an
Okay.
athletic supporter. And so he's in the first meeting and, and the coach asks, all right, does everybody have, your equipment? And, and he didn't have it. And he was humiliated. And then everybody would laughed at him. And then he went
Hmm.
home and looked at his dad and he goes, man, why didn't you tell me you're supposed to give me this kind of information. So
Okay.
fast forward like 8 years, here he is, this All-American at Arkansas playing in like the national championship bowl game, and they have all these bowl activities, and he has to wear a tie, and he doesn't know how to tie a tie, and he
Yeah.
feels like that little 8th grade boy again, and he's just
Okay.
so furious, that he still feels like that, and here he's this big strapping All-American, but he had to have ask someone who was a little more helpful than to tie a tie, and so he decided he was going to fix this and write this book, and he became a pastor. And so he said, in my house, we needed to have a biblical definition of manhood because you can't guess at it. You need to have something that you're aiming for or you'll never
Okay.
hit it. And
Yeah.
it's, so a real man rejects passivity. That's the number one thing that we see today.
Okay.
You know, Men just don't lead. They're just passive. They'll just let the circumstances eventually dictate their decisions rather than assert themselves and then risk failure or, embarrassment or whatever.
Mhm.
So rejecting passivity is huge. Accepting responsibility. So now in the whole woke era, everybody is a victim.
Yeah.
Somehow it's somebody else's fault. I have to blame somebody. And maybe I can get something for nothing, just because I can classify myself as some kind of a victim. And
Okay.
so accepting personal responsibility for mistakes that you made, that's how you grow. And you go, okay, I have to own this. And I had a great episode on my podcast with a gentleman who was from Iran, and he talked about going through a divorce and how furious he was with his wife. And he was going through all this counseling. He was kind of in this men's group. And this guy said, have you looked at yourself? And man, he stood up to almost like punch the guy. And then he realized that he was right, that he didn't really accept responsibility for what he contributed to the failure of that marriage. And so accepting personal responsibility is also just a huge, huge issue today for everyone. That's
Sure.
regardless of gender. And then leading courageously. We have poor leaders. We need better leaders. I think a lot of what we're seeing in America corporately and businesses, scandals, even in pulpits, is poor leadership. So we really need good leaders, and there aren't a lot of models out there.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, living our life for the greater reward, God's reward, trying to be Christ-like, trying to be selfless and servant-oriented. And so that's my definition in our house. And my 3 boys will tell you that they have heard that ad nauseum, when they come to complain about something. And I'm like, well, it sounds like, you're rejecting passivity. You need to reject some passivity. And they're like, oh. So
Yeah.
but I was ruthless in my implementation of the definition.
So you have 3 fine young men, I would
do have
imagine.
3 men, yes. And I have 1
Yes.
daughter. Mm-hmm.
And you have 1 daughter. So what
Mhm.
have you, oh gosh, before I ask about your daughter, what came to mind when you were talking about that, not being passive, is that it can be kind of dangerous today with how some people react to that. They will say you're being toxic.
Yes. Oh, yeah. You're going to be criticized. Yeah, we'll be
Okay.
persecuted as Christians.
Yeah.
Whatever. But it's just, we can't let these things just pass when there's like no resistance, because you have to remember that, my whole podcast and my whole purpose at this stage of my life is to help others with spiritual warfare, because
Okay.
this is what it is. Spiritual warfare is taking place every day. I call it wrestling with the inner man on the mat of
Mm-hmm.
the mind. So you have this self-talk in your head, and it's like, am I going to do what's right? What would Christ do in the situation? Or am I
Yeah.
going to be selfish? Or am I going to hold on to anger? Or am I going to not
Yeah.
forgive others? Am I going to resent people? Am I going to be eaten up with envy or pride or the other 7 deadly sins? So
Mhm.
I think that that's really the wrestling match, is spiritual warfare. And the fact is that, Dana, we're flesh. We have no
Yeah.
weapons. We have no weapons in the spiritual realm, except that we have a champion. If we just slap his hand and say, you're in, I'm out. And he wins them all, if we'll just do that. And so we're ill-equipped or just completely unequipped for spiritual warfare. And so the devil, he's the accuser. He's the one who gets all that stuff in your head. And you've got to be like, no, I reject you. That's a lie from the pit of hell.
Yeah.
And, and I'm going to go, the only offensive weapon in Ephesians, where it talks about the full armor of God, everything's a
Yes.
defensive weapon except for the sword of the Spirit, which
word.
is the word. And so that's where we have to go.
Yeah. You are bringing to mind an experience I had yesterday when I went to buy dog food at PetSmart.
Mhm.
So I had a 40, 50-pound bag of dog food. And I'm like, oh, nobody's in line. Great, I'm going. So I walk to the end of the aisle and I meet up with a woman who has a cart full of cat food, like hundreds of cans of cat food. So I let her go, and she could have offered to be like, hey, you just have 1 bag of dog food and it looks really heavy. You should go ahead of me. No, she went on ahead. I stood there while she took a year with her cat food and then asked if they could find something else for her while I waited. And boy, was I wrestling in my mind.
Yes.
Oh my gosh. And then finally, because some other people came up behind me and they asked for another cashier. And I was like, ugh. So I go over to this other cashier and he's like, how are you doing today? How are you? And I was like, honestly, I'm really irritated.
Well, he asked, it's
He
best to
did
tell the
ask.
truth.
I'm like, there's a crazy cat lady over there. I said, and I hate cats. And then I felt a little better, but then I also felt bad. I don't know how Jesus would have handled that, but it is a struggle.
It is every day. Every day we're in situations and circumstances like that with, the bumper sticker that you can't fix stupid. I have many of those little wrestling matches, and all I can do is try to shorten the cycle time, before I get back right. And that's why
Mhm,
my book's
mhm.
titled The Savage Path, because
Hmm,
the metaphor of the book is backpacking, and it's all about my backpacking experiences. And, when you're hiking out in the wilderness, it's best to stay on the trail because you can be just 30 feet down the mountain from the trail and not see it. And you can be walking in deadfall and snake infested areas and swampy areas. And that's what happens when we get outside of God's will. We're off the path. His will,
yeah,
it's the path. And so we're over here struggling and we're getting nicked up, scratched up, bit by bugs. And it's
yeah,
like, I think I'll get back on the path. And it just takes a long time sometimes. But
yeah,
the shorter you can make the recognition and correction, then it's just easier walking and you're living a more blessed life.
yeah, that's the truth. I do think I am getting better in that, but feeling it in the moment, it's hard.
It's okay, Dana.
Thank
I'm just
you.
telling you, you're all right. You're a lovely person still.
Thank you. I'm not gonna tell that story anymore because when I do, I get wound up.
It's too fresh. You're an image
It is
bearer
really
of God. You're God's daughter. That's the way I look at you.
thank you. So, let's talk a little bit about daughters. You have 3 sons and 1 daughter.
Hmm.
Have you given your daughter advice on dating and how she should be around men? Because I think that's an issue too.
Oh, man. Yes, all the time. Because, well, first of all, a father's responsibility with a daughter is to show her what genuine love and affection and how she should be treated
Hmm.
by the opposite sex. And if you don't, or if you're ignored by your dad, or maybe you're a child of divorce and you don't really have
Yeah.
a relationship with your dad, then young women become promiscuous because they're looking for that. They hunger for that. They might not even understand why they're like that. But that wasn't the case with my daughter. But my daughter, she's very much like me. We're super close.
Mhm.
And so, in high school, she was going out with this attractive young man. Now, he was super passive. He was from an affluent family, though. They
Okay.
had quite a bit of money, or a higher stage or position, in the economic strata than we were. And so, his mom would just give him money for anything. But like they were trying to plan their homecoming date or something, and he couldn't make up his mind. I used the expression with her. I said, he couldn't draw a conclusion with a crayon, and so I said, look, I know Nikki. That her name's Nicole. Or Nikki. I said,
Uh-huh.
I know you really like being in the driver's seat right now in this relationship because you get to choose where you go to eat. You get to choose what you're going to do. You're arranging it, and now I'm sure you've just gone through this with the age of your daughter. So now
Mhm.
the girls control everything and they plan the big
Oh,
prom event
so
and
true.
everybody gets the big limo and, and it's all this group thing and the guys are just kind of going along, I mean, they
Mhm.
hardly even ask the girl, it's all
Yep.
prearranged.
Mhm.
And so he couldn't make up his mind on where to go for dinner. And I suggested, you need to go to this melting pot, this fondue place and stuff.
Yeah.
But I just said, you're going to need to dump him. I said, because at some point, later on in life, if you were to marry him, if this were to progress, you know what? There'd be some problem with the utility company and you'd have to go do all the fighting, or you'd have some problem with your child at school. You have to go do all the fighting. You want a man who's going to fight for you, and he's not the guy. And
Yeah.
she really thought about that. And then she was like, she went off to Baylor and he was just following her. She's a natural leader. And
Okay. Yeah.
I said, you got to jettison this guy.
Uh-huh.
And she did. I think largely on my advice. I hope he's not listening, but yeah, she moved on and is married to a wonderful, like, manly man now, and is expecting my second grandchild from her. She has a little girl that's about 18 months now, and then they're expecting their second one in January, a boy.
Aw. So did she get how old was she when she got married?
And so she was 28,
Okay. Okay. Do you think that
29, 29, I think. Yeah, because she was born in 1990. Yeah, and they were
okay.
married.
You're bringing to mind that I think if you are a woman who's kind of a stronger leader or you're more like a kind of a trailblazer or you don't follow the crowd, do you think it's harder to find a young man to date?
Man, for sure.
Okay.
for sure, because you're intimidating to them, to many
Yeah.
of them. And
Mm.
so it takes a pretty strong, assertive person, to be able to stand up to another strong, assertive person. And so my daughter has seen that in me, so she knows what it looks like.
Right.
And but I do know that she has friends that she went to Baylor with. One girl is she's very attractive. She's a lawyer. She's 36 now, and basically almost given up on dating. She's
Oh
just
my
like,
gosh.
the only people I meet are these younger men that want me to support them. Because I make good money as an attorney, and it's really sad. And unfortunately, I hear that over and over and over, especially with the most beautiful, smart, talented. You're like, you're kidding me. They should be in a line. And
I
but
know.
they're out there like, man, there's nothing. The pool is empty, and
Yeah, that sounds a lot like well, my oldest daughter, she goes to Ohio State. She notices a lot of her friends and the guy friends and stuff are dating these girls who are in charge and kinda push them around or they have the upper hand and these guys
mhm.
just kinda lay down and roll over for it, and she just does not like that, and it's been a challenge to find a guy who's not like that. So, I know they're out there. I'm sure
Yeah,
you're
that's what all the romantic comedies are about. They don't really like one another at first because they're almost like vying with one another for power, supremacy, control, whatever you want to call it. And it's funny, like the first year of marriage, even with my daughter and her husband, it's like, okay, whose family are we going to spend Christmas with first and Thanksgiving? And basically, I would say, that the first year of marriage is essentially a power struggle.
okay.
And, but it's interesting to observe, especially in your own children, and I don't say anything about it unless they ask, for my thoughts on it. But, marriage is a compromise. Everything is about no one gets their way all the time. And what I was concerned about, because she was 29, that the longer you're out there in the single world taking care of yourself as a strong, independent woman, then the harder it is for you to make those compromises later to have the relationship that you really seek, because you get pretty selfish. You get
Yeah.
used. I'm going to go out to eat tonight. I don't have to check with anybody else. I'm gonna, whatever you want to do. And so that is a danger. I think that they all face, both genders. The longer you put off seeking your true life mate, the person you might want to have children with, and then the harder it is to make those compromises, and the more struggle you might have early on in a marriage.
Yeah, do you feel like there is, like, an ideal age for somebody to be married? I mean, you can't really work around that and be like, "Oh, 25, I gotta get married now." But, I mean, what do you think?
Well, Dana, you and I talked, before we were recording, and I wasn't uh I wasn't the perfect guy. And you shouldn't, in God's plan, we're not supposed to have sex, before marriage. And
Mhm.
so we're sexual beings, and that's kind of hard to put off, till your
Right.
late 20s. So
Yeah.
I don't suggest that there is a perfect age, but I suggest that you wait and make it special as God intended. And
Mhm.
not many people do that. And I think the key is really just to, for me, like I said, I went through a divorce in 2000, and then I remarried in 2002,
'Kay.
thinking that I never would. I mean, I was just
Huh.
like, women, I'm done. I was reading the USA Today article about two professors at the University of Michigan, and their last name is Cass, Kass, and they were sociology professors, and they were saying, man, we see all these kids coming in to college, and they don't have any idea how to properly court, with the
Yeah.
idea of being married, eventually. And so they wrote this book, or they compiled almost like an encyclopedic uh, knowledge about marriage, and it was called Wing to Wing, Oar to Oar: Readings on Courtship and Marriage. And I bought that book. It's very thick, and I read it, every bit of it. And then I realized, you know what? God made me to be married, and I didn't have coaching from my dad or like my parents or anything about how to go about selecting a mate and all that, which I wished I had had.
Okay.
But I'm going to do it the right way this second time, and I'm going to be super intentional.
Okay.
And I told you a little bit about my charm school and summer school podcast series on courtship and dating. So
Share that.
well, so I just decided that, look, young men, what will they do to get a trophy deer? Let's say they're
Mm.
big hunters,
Yeah.
and so they'll first, they have to study the habitat. Where do these deer live? Where do the really big ones live? The trophies, and so what do they eat and when do they come out? And you're doing all of this research, and then you're like, okay, well, I'll disguise myself. I'll stalk them. I'll hide up in blinds. I'll even rub animal urine on me so that they can't smell me. And the lengths that people will go to get that trophy, that Boone and Crockett to hang on their wall. Like, well, that's really not very important. It's a trophy to hang on the wall, but your wife, the woman who's going to bear
Mm.
your children, the
Yeah.
most important decision other than accepting Christ in your life is who you marry, and you don't want to go through a divorce. I can assure you, you don't want to do
Yeah.
that. And
Mhm.
so, why wouldn't you put the same effort into the pursuit of that woman?
Okay.
And the other illustration, I love this show, the Curse of Oak Island on the History Channel, where they're searching for this treasure up on this island in Canada. And something significant was buried. There was this tremendous human industry several hundred years ago, and they're still
Okay.
searching for it. But it's like the links, that a treasure hunter will go to, to dig and to use ground penetrating radar and all this technology and all this stuff to try to find that treasure. Again, it's the treasure metaphor, the trophy metaphor. Why not go through that? And so that's what this Charm School series, I probably didn't name it very well in the age of keywords and
Oh,
searchability and
okay.
SEO and all that.
Okay.
But Charm School, people probably don't even know what I'm talking about. I might re-release those, with some AI
Okay.
filtered keyword. And so the pastor that was my co-host on the show, we did these 4 series, and we did it like college number, like 101, 201, 301, 401.
Okay.
They're pretty humorous too. And
Okay, I like that.
and then I did a follow-up to it where I had the only female guests I've ever had, and they represented different generations, So there was Gen Z, Gen X, millennial, and a baby boomer. And
Okay.
all of these women, very attractive. 3 of them professional counselors, and one had just graduated from college and was about to get married. So 2 were single. And I said, all right, you've heard my thesis on, what a man should do to really bag, a wonderful, stunning, attractive woman like you. How should they go about it? Would you please let us know
Okay.
if I'm just all wet and these were bad theories?
Sure.
You can either corroborate or refute, my theories. And that was called summer school, because when you fail, you have to go to summer
Oh,
school.
for
And
sure.
so
Yeah.
same thing, 101, 201, 301, and 401. And so go to Wrestling with the Inner Man and check out those podcasts if you want to be entertained and educated a little bit about proper courtship and marriage.
Well, David, remind me, what is the name of your podcast? Because it sounds amazing. It makes me wish I was a guy.
It's Wrestling with the Inner Man.
Okay.
And then my tagline is, because the first fight we each face every day is the fight between our selfish, sinful nature and our Holy Spirit inspired divine nature. Wrestling with the Inner Man. And my website is www.thesavagepath.com, which is the title of my book.
You have a perfect last name.
It is. It's been great. I've enjoyed it my whole life.
Good. So wait, if somebody wants to get in touch with you, just visit your
Yes,
website.
website, but my email, I'd
Okay.
be
Yep.
happy to, receive emails. I love feedback, criticism. I don't care. David at thesavagepath.com.
Okay. Well, thank you, David, so much. I wish you all the best. I'm going to be buying your book as a gift, and I hope it's received well. It's
Yeah,
like,
I think that people, young men will like it. There's a lot of humor in it.
okay.
And I went to Gary Thomas, who wrote the book Sacred Marriage, was our writer in residence at our church. And I went and I sat down and talked to him. I said, as an author, I'm thinking about writing this book, and, what's your advice? And he says, look, there's lots of stuff about men's ministry, Christian men, but it's all kind of preachy, but if you
Hmm.
could put some humor in there, and I go, man, that's my wheelhouse. I have so many
Perfect.
funny stories in there that it's quite entertaining. But, for those who have ears to hear, it's kind of like a proverb, I'm not really too much in your face. I'm letting you figure out what the moral of each chapter is. And so I hope that whoever you give it to enjoys it.
Yeah. And they don't think that I'm like giving them a stick of gum because they have bad breath, right?
Right. Never refuse if someone offers.
All right. Well, thank you so much, David. It's been a lot of fun talking to you.
Okay, Dana, thank you.
If this episode encouraged you, make sure to